in Eastern Standard like I am, look who's awake right now. Normally when I go live in the morning, she's still fast asleep having her first big nap of the day. Oh, so 6-month-old Corey is awake and look, isn't she wonderful? So glad she could join me for this. I have on my heart to share with you today a question that comes up every once in a while in my Big Family Moms community of how do you afford having a big family? And that's a very valid question, especially right now, right? We're living in a time of inflation, of it looks like we're already in a recession, and that can be daunting for anybody, right? Especially when you've got kids on board and more than 2 children, because the cost of just groceries, of gas, of the vehicle you drive, those things add up. For those of us who are actually, watching the numbers, it can be a daunting prospect to ask that question and then to look for serious answers. So it comes up in the group, and I thought, I have so much on my heart to share. I struggled with this question. I think you have to struggle with this question. I think it's actually responsible to ask this question. How will you afford to have a big family? But there's another thing. I just want to unpack it for a second. Because if I ask the question, how will I afford it? Fear rises up instantly. Like I can feel the clench in my chest as I say it. How will I afford it? Have you ever seen the studies that say, they ran one up here in Maclean's in a big magazine here in Canada that's, kind of like our own version of, I don't know, the Washington Post, the New York Times. It's very highly regarded amongst Canadian elites that it costs, apparently, according to the smarty pants who put this thing together, $1 million in the lifetime of a child. When I looked closer at the actual article, it wasn't just like the upfront cost of things like diapers and food, which would be like very, very basic stuff, maybe, clothing and some equipment like a stroller and a car seat. But they went above and beyond, and it was like lost potential wages from a stay-at-home mom for so many years, depending on how long she chose to stay home. And then they also were like, and all the money she could have made, has she invested all those earnings and made this like really hard ROI? It was a very generous study. So if you've heard those kind of stats floating around, then it can be extra daunting when you start to do the math. And I have 11 children. Let me tell you, $11 million has not run through our hands. And I don't come from a wealthy background at all. My dad was the single income earner. My mom was home with us until I was 11, until we were all all 4 of us kids growing up were well into school. But when God first really pierced my husband and mine's hearts to trust him with our family size, to let go of the proverbial wheel and trust him with the timing, with the spacing, and with the ultimate number of how many children we would have, barring major medical grade mental health circumstances. I was 28 years old. We were students at Bible college in the States, in the Midwest, in Minnesota, actually. And we had been serving as missionaries, like at a missionary training college, and getting our degree in cross-cultural studies there. And we were serving as mentors, like married mentors to the married students. And we had served overseas as well. And we were looking potentially to a future of a life in missions, more than likely overseas. But either way, it would be fundraising, if not some sort of version of tent making, like Paul, who was a tent maker, and he had like a craftsman way of contributing to his own cost of living. So we were already living in that setting of God providing for us our next meal, our next month of costs. Because when we lived in the States as Canadian citizens, we could not work. We could not legally earn. I couldn't even babysit legally. No money could exchange hands. So I come from a unique background that when God challenged us to trust him with our family size and become and embrace the blessing of children, become a big family effectively, and being willing to do that. And listen, I had 3 children under 3. Pardon me, 3 children under 2 at the time when this happened. So we'd gone from my tiny little car that I brought from the States when we first became students, and we had to quickly upgrade and find something like what do they call it again? Like a wagon. We were well on our way to minivan stage. So I didn't struggle with how God would provide for us, whether it was through work, whether it was through support, whether it was through any sort of way that the cash would get to us. I didn't struggle with it then. because I was already living in this really weird space that some of you who catch this may already live in or have lived in, that people who've done missions have the unique experience of knowing what it's like to trust God for the next dollar, for the next meal, for the next month. So I didn't struggle with that, but believe me, I struggled with other things. I struggled with the fact that I'd had 2 C-sections and could have all C-sections. And if you've tracked with me for a little bit, you've heard that, yes, I have. All my 11 children, with a set of twins in there, have been born by C-sections. I've had 10 C-sections. And that has taken a lot of faith to face another C-section, because that's no joke to face multiple C-sections. There are inherent risks that come with that. So anybody who says that it doesn't take faith to have another C-section, I don't know if they've had many C-sections. Anyway, moving on. Stay on point. So how do we afford to have a big family? Well, here's some advice for you practically. I'm going to do it in 2 ways. First, I'm going to speak to the heart, and then I'm going to speak to like the practical sort of like what you personally can do. Well, first is to really be honest. Is where are you putting your faith? Is it how am I? How are we? How are you going to do it? Because if the emphasis is on the pronoun of you, well, then you're probably going to answer the question like any honest person, say, I have no idea how this is all going to work out. But that's also an opportunity to say, God, you have to provide. And I can almost hear God chuckling in my mind and being like, you figured it out, didn't you? That your next heartbeat, that your next baby, that your next meal, it always came from me ultimately. That the strength that I have to put together the meals, to go to the grocery store, the fact that there are food on the shelves at all, the fact that it rained today and it'll nourish the ground, all of it is evidence of his providential care. And I think as a Westerner, having grown up in the West and having grown up in a relatively prosperous society, like looking at all of human history, we take it for granted that we did it, that it was our own ingenuity and of course hard work and so on and all those other good things in and of themselves. But we tend to take the credit, don't we? But in a way, we also take all the weight that I don't believe that God has put on our hearts, especially speaking mom to mom, woman to woman. The Lord ultimately is our provider. And maybe this is just a time when you need to hear it again. And I'll speak to my own soul when I start to get nervous and I'm like, how is this all going to work out? Especially with inflation on the rise. Listen, gas is more expensive in Canada than it is in the States. So if you think your gas prices are high, they're even higher up here. And I drive a 15-passenger van. So yeah, when our gas has literally doubled from where it was a year ago. And our income hasn't necessarily doubled either. So it takes the same faith that I was applying as in my 20s as a missionary in training. I had faith then, like mustard seed size faith. And I saw God come through for years at a time. So when he invited us to trust him in a way that honestly, I would have rather died initially. It was more glamorous and it would be easier than to be a mom, because being a big family inherently means there's going to be big family bills, big family vehicles, big family costs, big family reality. So just keeping it to the financial piece, not all the other stuff of big family, like organization and getting into your routine and keeping calm, and just like, day-to-day life as any parent multiplied to the factor of how many children you have. Just for the finance piece, I'm going to challenge you. And I say this completely in love. Who did you think was going to bring the money in the first place? First you're like, well, it's probably going to be primarily my husband's job. My husband, he's a tradesman. He's a contractor. He works as a handyman, goes to work every day, runs his own business. We run a couple of businesses actually from home. And was it all just the works of my hands, or ultimately even just have the thought to run a business, for example, or the thought to go get a job, the strength, the wardrobe, the wherewithal, all of that, the next heartbeat, the clarity of mind, the sleep. I choose to give glory where glory I believe is due and say, Lord, you truly are my provider. Right? Psalm 23 in action. The Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want. And so all the nitty-gritty details of how are we going to afford this? See, I settled that question the night. If you've read my book, I have a chapter called That Night. That one night when the twins were just a couple months old, My cycle had just come back, and God had been chasing me down like the hound of heaven, saying, will you trust me? Will you trust me? Everyone else was like, are you done? Are you done? Are you done? And God was right there like this heartbeat inside of my soul. I never expected this because I thought only crazy people did that. People who really like kids. And he kept saying, will you trust me? Will you trust me? And I guess that's the heart of the question when it comes with how will you afford that? Will you trust the Lord will work it out ultimately? So question number one. And if you're really struggling with that, I have a link below in this video for my free mini course, which I totally invite you and urge you to take, because this is actually where I unpack more fully that story. I tell about that night. I tell about how I came to a place as a missionary student of trusting God in a way that was harder than a missions. Harder, martyrdom would have been easier for me than to embrace the blessing of children, because I knew that meant a lot of little people. It meant totally changing my life, and it meant money, to be real. Okay, second part of this I said I'd talk about. So when it comes to how will we afford that, one is to examine your heart and really see, like, what is the source of your faith? Like, where is that really coming from? Is it faith in yourself, in your own ability fundamentally? Or is it beginning really, really rooted and grounded in the goodness of God, in the provision of God, and the fact that, and I challenged, I said, Lord, if you're going to bless my womb to be fruitful and multiply and have easily up to a dozen kids, right? This is baby 11, you must provide. You must. I don't know how you're going to do it. And I just planted my flag of faith, and I'm like, but I believe that you will, because if you made them, then Lord, you have to provide for them. And because I had that mustard seed of faith that he'd provided for us all those years, it actually for me was easier to trust him. I had other stuff that I had to work out, a lot of other stuff, but that for me wasn't my first and biggest issue, but maybe it is for you. And that's completely understandable if you've never really had to walk by faith and not by sight in the area of financial provision. And a time right now of inflation and recession, hot housing markets, all of it, depending on where you live, which is pretty much across the board in the West right now, even globally, then this might be the first time you've really had to really peel away all the layers and realize that the core of your provision comes straight from God. And that's actually, it's an intense place to be. It's also a very, very freeing place to be. And some people say it's so irresponsible because, God's ways are higher than our ways, and his way, I think of the gospel, it's so counter what the world would do, right? They'd send a giant hero, not a suffering servant. So, but God's ways are always higher, and they usually strip us to our core. So, when it's just like naked before God, and I'm like, you're all I have. You're all I have. Oh, he's all I have. So what can you do? Well, then it also begs the question of stewardship, right? He has given each one of us a portion of energy, of opportunity, of the family we grew up in, the education that we received, just, opportunities before us to maybe continue improving ourselves, learning new skills. We have an opportunity to steward the time, the talent, the opportunity, the relationships around us. And that's very individual. So just speaking broadly, I decided to, like, the two coins of faith are God's part of it. This sounds like an oxymoron. It's like a paradox. God is ultimately the completely sovereign provider. And yet I have a role in that too, right? Because this isn't licensed to be completely irresponsible and just be like, I was just going to drop a big pile of money on the lawn or something. God's just going to send me my big family mom welfare check or something. So it's not a license for, how would I say it? Slothfulness, just be like, oh, they'll take care of it, so I don't have to do anything. It's just where I'm putting my ultimate trust. And at the same time, I'm being diligent and faithful in what he's put in front of me. That's just stewardship 101. So for me, what does that look like? I just touched on it briefly. We started a family business because that was a good fit for us. And we did that maybe like 8 years ago now. And we made it through the first 5 years and still going. So that's one way that we've created an income stream. I also create courses, and I've written books, and I've picked up some freelance writing this summer. So there's lots of ways to make money and to generate income. And I've chosen to meet this recession with a measure of faith, being like, Lord, this is a little bit intimidating, right? To see the tidal wave of rising costs. And at the same time, as a Christian, it's also an opportunity for my faith to grow, and for our roots to go deeper, and to say, okay, Lord, then how can we be good stewards and diligent in what we have. So, and there's only two ways to, like, when it comes financially, is like to bring down your costs and increase your income. And I'm not going to talk about that too extensively because it sounds like she's getting the end of a rope and it's time for nap number 2. But I will say this, and if you'd like me to unpack a little bit more, really get into the nitty gritty of like how to coast through this time as a big family mom with your faith in place, but then also getting into the specifics of, okay, how could I lower my costs and increase my income at the same time? Because that's just like economics 101. So yeah, it's like to examine, are you being, responsible? Are there areas in your own just day-to-day life, maybe luxuries? This might be a time to tighten up your belt a little bit, and that could be a good thing. It takes faith to do that, and to realize like, okay, yeah, maybe we're not going to order pizza, but we're going to make pizza together, and you're making memories and having fun and doing that together, right? So how do we afford it? First is ultimately by faith. And second is by being faithful and responsible insofar as we can. I mean, we made plenty of mistakes, costly mistakes over the years, and also just dumb choices. So I'll be the first to admit it. And then you look back and like, oh my gosh, could I please take back that $15,000 dumb choice I just made? Anyway, no refunds. You're like, oh. I felt the sting of the school of hard knocks. And I've also seen God provide again and again and again. And one of the other ways that I'm going to leave you here that I recommend if you're struggling with this, like how to do this, is just ask in the group. It's a great place in my Big Family Moms community. If you don't know about it, link below. It's just like, how are you all doing it? Y'all, especially if you're in the southern states. One lady asked that, and it was great. So many women chimed in just to share like how they individually, like as the women, contribute, if they do contribute financially to the family pot, whether it's from home or away from home or however they do it. There's so many different ways. Or just like, what does your family do? How do you make money? How do you generate income? Because there's so many different creative ideas of things that you can do from home. My daughter is almost 18 and she does virtual assistant work. And she's able to do that from home and then make it work with her schedule because she's got a lot going on. And I've also asked for her, at least for one more year, to still be available to help me with some of the big family mom life stuff, the busy hours of the day. So, and she's also picked up a job at the local pharmacy. You go. So, and that's just her spending money. We don't charge her rent or anything just yet. Talk about that though after she graduates high school and so on. Another talk for another day. So there's faith, right? The direction of looking to God, right? The author and perfecter of your faith, to look to him to provide ultimately. And then there's the other direction of what he, invites us to do as good stewards. So that's like the deeper heart of how we afford being a big family. We keep our eyes on him. And then we look to see how we can be responsible with the time, with the talent, with the resources, with the skills, and even like new skills that I've learned over the years. I've learned how to develop websites because my husband needed a website. And I was like, well, I could learn how to do that a lot cheaper than if we hire somebody. And wow, guess what? Now I know how to do web design, and I've been able to sell that service to other people and make more money. So when I was a little girl, I wasn't thinking, when I grow up, I'm going to learn how to design websites. But, because the internet didn't exist when I was a little girl. But now here I am, and God is moving us through the different seasons of our own big family life and being faithful to put ideas, courage, resources just in the time that we need them. But it does take just that mustard seed of faith to believe that he'll do it in the first place. Because if deep down inside, you've shut down the possibility that God will provide, and you've put all that responsibility on you, it can be soul crushing. It can be mind-bendingly crushing. So big family heart below, if you're really struggling with that, that's really going to help clear a lot of that stress out of your heart and your head so that you can trust God and in turn walk out the faithfulness of being a steward to your own big family. So that's it. I'm going to sign off. I'm just going to pop in real quick in the chat. See, hello. How do you decide what really, there's a great question here, so I'll take a minute longer for anyone who wants to stick around. Kat is saying, hi, how do you decide what really you need to buy and what's just a wish or a splurge? How do you discern? Well, that's a really good question. And when you think about it, Kat, like, what do you need to live? I mean, like, bare bones, you will die if you don't have it. That's like, we're talking air, food, water, shelter, right? Has basic clothing depending on where you live. So that right there is probably your bare minimum last. We're kind of moving up like Maslow's list of hierarchies of needs, right? If you're familiar with that. So those are your basic needs that you need just just for bare bones survival. And then, once those are covered and there's enough food and water and shelter and basic clothing for everyone, then you move up to the next thing. You start probably thinking about things like education, right? And other things that are important and good, but they weren't what you needed to live, right? If you took a year off, learning how to do language arts, for example, speaking as a homeschooler, nobody's going to die. But if we take, a month off food, yeah, people are going to suffer. So when it comes to the splurges, there's two categories, and I teach it to my kids. Oh, it's raining. I hope it's not too loud. Needs and wants. And my kids will hear me. They'll be like, you don't really need to play with that toy. You just want to. So that's okay to be honest. And then you also have to look at your budget and be like, okay, do we have a line item for these extras? These things like maybe, let me just off the top of my head, maybe just, giving yourself a $25 a month personal allowance so that you could spend on literally anything guilt-free. You could go get your manicure done, or you could save it up for a couple of months and buy something special for yourself, or, whatever. If you just, it's not really necessary. And in a crisis, you could easily set it aside and live without it. So it's kind of personal because I guess we're not talking face to face. I'm like, okay, well, what are you talking about? Because, there's also just sentimental value. What's important to you may not be as important to me, but that's still valuable to you. So you know how it is when you're a kid, you're like going through the grocery store and they're like, Mom, I need a chocolate bar. You're like, no, you don't need a chocolate bar. You'll be just fine. I got $300 worth of groceries right here. I think you probably know how to do it, Kat. It's just sometimes being honest with yourself and creating a budget line in your own budget if you get to do that. And just decide, okay, this is for the, the bills, all the important stuff that we need just to have food and shelter, and then what's left after. And then you can portion that out. Part of it for savings is recommended, right, in case of an emergency. And then if you want to have some just for fun, like just for fun spending, like maybe you just want to go to the movies together as a family once a month, or you want to pay for a subscription service, or you want to, be able to go out and just do some fun stuff. That is, once you've budgeted it, then it kind of is really just up to you. So long as it's not like immoral or criminal, then go for it. Have fun. It's okay to have these things. Like the Lord gives good gifts to his children. Do you hear that word? Good gifts. He doesn't just give us the basics of life. He also gives good gifts to the children he loves. And he knows that you have a heart to give good gifts to your children. And it's okay to you to have some good gifts too. And if you're in a season of needing to really tighten your belt and maybe there's some debts, and so you're going to want to clear those up first, and it's still okay to even keep maybe a small, maybe you have a $5 a month allowance, and your big treat is going out and get yourself like a special coffee or a special treat, whatever it is for you. Buy yourself, some flowers. It's personal, but I think you can do it, especially if you know the budget you're working with. Then you can see, where the money is, and then you don't feel guilty every time you buy something because you just feel like you're just setting yourself up for the debit card bouncing next time you go to the grocery store or something. So I hope that helped you. If you want to talk about it more, Kat, feel free to pop into the group and ask the question because we can unpack it even more and brainstorm together as big family moms. I've gone over in my normal amount of time, but I did want to answer this question because it's such a good one. Ladies, God bless you. I hope this has been helpful to you. Links below to the group and to the free Big Family Heart course if you'd like to take that. It's my gift to you to bless you in this season, especially right now, as we all need to grow in our own faith and faithfulness as it comes to being a big family mom and walking it out with grace and courage and joy. And say bye. All right. Bye. I'll talk to you later.